Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shiur. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, marching on towards the end of Mishnah Berurah. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Megillah. We'll be learning in today's shiur B'Yitzhak Hashem, Daf Kuf Nun Hey Amid Beis. We pick up on the bottom line of Kuf Nun Hey Amid Aleph. Siman Tafresh Tzadik Sif Yud. Bottom line. Says the Mechaber. Mi she'yodea laz v'yodea ashuris. We have spoken over the last couple of days about the possibility of reading the Megillah in a different language. And we have said, technically speaking, if you have a Megillah that's written in a different language, so let's say you have a Megillah that's written in English, and the Baal Koreh understands English, and the Shomeya, the one who's listening to the Baal Koreh, understands English. Technically speaking, if the Baal Koreh takes that English Megillah and reads it in English to the Shomeya who understands English, both the reader and the Shomeya could be Yotze the mitzvah. Now, we said in yesterday's shiur, the Chavetz Chaim brought down from the Lavush, that is certainly not our minig. Our minig is that we use a Hebrew Megillah written in Ksav Ashuris, the way a Sefer Torah is written, and we read it in Lashon HaKodesh, and we said that Lashon HaKodesh and Ksav Ashuris is an automatic. If you have a Megillah that's written properly in Hebrew, in Ksav Ashuris, and the Baal Koreh reads it in Hebrew, then even if he doesn't understand Hebrew, even if the listener doesn't understand Hebrew, still in all, everyone is Yotze. And we brought a raya from the words Achashtranim b'nei haramochim. We don't know what Achashtranim b'nei haramochim mean, yet Chazal tell us that we're all Yotze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah when we hear the Megillah. So you see that even though you don't know what those words mean, you could still be Yotze. Now, the Mechaber says like this, Mi she'yodea laz v'yodea ashuris. Let's say you have somebody who understands Hebrew. He also knows English. Many of us, we understand Hebrew. We know English. So yodea laz, we know a foreign language. V'yodea ashuris, and we know Hebrew, and we could read Hebrew written in ashuris. Eino yotze balaz. Says the Mechaber, if you have the ability to read the Megillah and hear the Megillah in Hebrew, you could read it, you understand it, you have a Megillah that's written in Ashuris, then you cannot be Yotze hearing the Megillah in Alaz, in a different language. That's the first opinion over here in the Mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kat Lamed Gimel, Eino Yotze balaz, Mashma das ha-Mechaber listoim k'deyazu. It is implied from the language, from the phraseology of the Mechaber. The Mechaber states this opinion as a stam. He doesn't call it a yesh oimrim. He doesn't attribute it to anyone. He just writes it stam as a default, that this is the halacha. So the implication is that the Mechaber wants to paskin like this shita. Mikamakim, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, still in all, einoi chayzer umevarich. If somebody who knows Hebrew heard the Megillah in, let's say, English, from an English Megillah, and now he learns this halacha and he says, oh, I know Hebrew, and I could have heard it in Hebrew from a Hebrew Megillah, I guess I wasn't Yotze, I should go back and hear it again. Still in all, he shouldn't make another bracha, to Safek brachas lahakel, because this would certainly fall under the category of Safek brachas, since there is an opposing opinion. Umispara b'paiskim, it is explained in the paiskim, the Ladeyazu, according to this opinion, who says, again, that if you have the ability to hear it in Hebrew, if you understand Hebrew, then you can't be Yotze in a Megillah of Laz. According to this opinion, Ein loy lahaitzi afilu lemisha einoi mevin lashon hakodesh. Let's say you understand Hebrew, and you could read Hebrew, and you have a Hebrew Megillah. Somebody else comes over to you with an English Megillah, and he says, look, could you do me a favor? Could you read the Megillah to me from this English Megillah? I don't understand Hebrew, and I understand English, so I could be Yotze with a kriya from this English Megillah. Could you do me a favor, and could you read Megillah for me? Says the Paiskim say that L'deyazu, according to this first opinion here in Sif Yud, Ein loy lahaitzi afilu lemisha eina mevin lashon hakodesh. The Baal Koreh who understands lashon hakodesh cannot read a Megillah of Laz to be moitzi somebody else who does not understand Hebrew. So in this case, the Shemeya, he, technically speaking, could rely on the opinions that hold that he could be Yotzei with a Megillah of Laz, because he doesn't understand Hebrew. But the Baal Koreh, according to this first opinion here in Sif Yud, cannot be Saimach on that Kula, because he understands Hebrew. Say the Paiskim, this Baal Koreh should not learn English, should not learn Laz to be Moitzi this other fellow. Why? Because since he, the Baal Koreh, himself, is not eligible to use this Kula, because he understands Hebrew, this creates a not level playing field between the Baal Koreh, the one who wants to be Moitzi the Shemeya, and the Shemeya who wants to be Yotzei with the Kriya of the Baal Koreh. We always say that in order for somebody to be Moitzi somebody else, we've seen that there has to be a level playing field. They both have to have the same level of chiyuv. If I have a chiyuv daraisa, you have a chiyuv darabanan. Let's say we spoke about cases where you have a gadol and a katan, and the gadol has one level of chiyuv, and the katan has a different level of chiyuv. So then the katan can't be moitzi the gadol. So too over here, the playing field is not an even playing field. Why? Because it's even worse, really, than not a level playing field. Over here, what the Baal Koreh is trying to do is, he's trying to be moitzi the shemeya, but he's trying to be moitzi the shemeya with a kriya that would not work for him himself. Since he understands Hebrew, according to this first opinion, he's not eligible to be yotzei the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah with a Megillah of Laz. So even though he knows English, and the Megillah is written in English, and he's going to read it in English, he couldn't be yotzei with that kriya, because he understands Hebrew. He cannot be moitzi the shemeya, even though such a kriya would work for the shemeya, because the shemeya does not understand Hebrew, but since it wouldn't work for him himself, he cannot be moitzi the shemeya with that kind of kriya. That's the first opinion here. Continues the Mechaber, however, bottom line, V'yesh omrim, however, there are those that say, and the Berurah takes this from Rashi and the Rambam, V'yesh omrim, there are those opinions, sheyotzei, that the Baal Koreh can be moitzi, the shemeya, in such a case. Says the Chavetz Chaim as Lamed Da, you should know the b'chol makom darmina de yotzei balaz. Now he tells us a rule that goes through all of these cases where we say that there's the possibility of being yotzei Mikra Megillah in a foreign language. So again, let's say in the case where you have a Megillah written in English. Now let's even go more chamur, based on the opinions we saw yesterday. Let's say you have a Megillah that's written in English, but the characters, the letters, are Hebrew letters written in Ksav Ashuris. So you have an English Megillah that's transliterated into Hebrew, and it's written in Ksav Ashuris. And the Baal Koreh doesn't understand Hebrew, and the Shemeya doesn't understand Hebrew, but they both understand English. And now the Baal Koreh is going to read from this transliterated Megillah. He's going to read the Megillah in English for this Shemeya, who doesn't understand Hebrew and understands English. So that would be a case where l'chayra, using all of the chumras, except for the chumrah of the lavush, that we don't even do that, we only do Hebrew, right? But that would be a case where technically you could be yotzei with an English Mikra Megillah. Now the Chavetz Chaim says, Da, you should know, the b'chol makom darmina de yotzei balaz. In any case where we say that there's a possibility of being yotzei Mikra Megillah in a language other than Hebrew, in a foreign tongue, hainu shal kol panim, Teva so'achat shtronim b'nei ramachim yikru lifneihem b'loshen HaKodesh. Achat shtronim b'nei ramachim, those words have to be written in Loshen HaKodesh, and they have to be read in Loshen HaKodesh. Now, the Mishnah Berurah only says yikra. He only says that they have to be read in Loshen HaKodesh. But they also have to be written in Loshen HaKodesh. Otherwise, when you read it in Hebrew, it would be a kriya bal peh. If Achashtronim b'nei ramachim are written somehow in English and you read it in Hebrew, that would constitute a kriya bal peh. So obviously he means that the words ha'achashtranim b'nei haramachim have to be written in Lashon HaKodesh and they have to be read in Lashon HaKodesh. Why is that? Very simple. Because we don't know how to translate ha'achashtranim b'nei haramachim. So you cannot possibly write them in English or French or Spanish. And if you did, it might be completely inaccurate because we don't know what the translation of those words are. So if you're going to be Yotze with an English Megillah or a Spanish Megillah or a French Megillah, ha'achashtranim b'nei haramachim have to be read ha'achashtranim b'nei haramachim, and they have to be written in Lashon HaKodesh. Okay, says the Ramah, last two words in the Shulchan Aruch, Kufnei Nun Hey Amud Aleph, Hago. V'im ksuva b'shnei l'shonos. Let's say you have a Megillah that's written in two languages. Misha mevinim yotzu. Somebody who understands both languages could technically be yotze. Says the Mishnah Berurah kat lamed hey b'shnei l'shonos. K'goy miktzas Megillah b'lashon echad. Part of the Megillah is written in English, or miktzasa b'lashon acheres, and the rest of the Megillah is written in Spanish. Yotzu b'di'eved. If you understand English and you understand Spanish, b'di'eved you could be yotze with such a Megillah. However, lechatchila, ein nachay lihiyos ksuva b'shtei l'shonos. Lechatchila, the Chavetz Chaim says, it would not be proper for a Megillah to be written in two l'shonos. Now we go to Sif Yod Aleph. Top line here, Kufnei Hey Amud Beis. Yesh limchais, we should protest. B'yad hakorim l'nashim ha-Megillah b'lashon laz. We should protest against those people, those men, who read the Megillah for women in a foreign language. So they're figuring like this. They're thinking to themselves, the women don't know Hebrew. They don't understand Lashon HaKodesh. So what we'll do is, we'll read the Megillah for them in English. And I assume that the people who were doing that, they were following all the rules that we've seen until now. So let's say again, they had, let's say, an English Megillah written in Hebrew letters in Ksav Ashuris, transliterated. So it's an English Megillah, and the Balkara understands English, and the women who are listening understand English, and you're going to read the Megillah to them in English. So technically you could be Yotze, but, says the Mechaber, Yesh limchais, we should protest against those who read the Megillah for women in another language, even though you're filling out all the requirements that we've learned until now. It's not a Kriya Bal Peh, because the Megillah is Thak written in that language that you're reading it to the women in. So it's not a problem of Kriya Al Peh. So technically, this would be okay. Yet, says the Mechaber, we should protest against this practice. Why is that? Says the Mishnah Berurah kat lamed zayin. Tamadover, the reason for this is, Mishum, because of the halacha that we just learned in Sif Yud. Mishum da gevarim, because the men, hakarim, who are the Balei Kriya, the men who are the Balei Kriya who are reading for these women, mevinim Lashon HaKodesh. They understand Lashon HaKodesh. V'yesh lachush, and we need to be concerned, l'dasa paiskim, for the opinion of the paiskim that we just learned about in Mishnah Berurah Ois Kat Lamed Gimel. We have to be chayshish for the opinion of these paiskim, shesayvrim, who hold, dehechid shehu mevid Lashon HaKodesh, that when you, the Balkare, understand Lashon HaKodesh, eina yotze b'kriya balaz. You can't be yotze with the kriya of a different language. Umimela, and since the kriya would not work for you, for the Balkare, because you understand Lashon HaKodesh, memela eina yachal lahitzi b'kriya zu. You can't lane such a kriya to be moitzi aflami she'eina meven Lashon HaKodesh, even for somebody like a woman who does not understand Lashon HaKodesh. The kanal, like we just saw in Ois Kat Lamed Gimel at the beginning of this year. Again, you're trying to do a favor for the women. You want to lay the Megillah for the women in a language that they understand. So you think that what you're doing is a Maila, but it's not. Because since you, the Balkare, understand Hebrew, then according to the first opinion in Sif Yud, you cannot be Yotze with a Kriya of a different language because you understand Hebrew. And then according to the Paiskim that we brought down in Ois Kat Lamed Gimel, since you can't be Yotze with this Kriya, you cannot be Mitzi somebody else with that Kriya. And that's why Yesh Limchais B'yadai, we have to protest against people who do this. V'oid, and another reason why we should protest, Mishom ha'achashtranim b'nei haramachim, because again of the words of ha'achashtranim b'nei haramachim, she'eni yadua b'lai shelahen, because there's no way to translate it for the women in their laws. V'im Tomer, and if you'll say Yikra ha'chashtranim b'nei haramochim b'lashon hakodesh, right? Let's say you'll say, okay, so when we get to the words ha'chashtranim b'nei haramochim, we'll read that in Hebrew. Well, that would only work if the Megillah is written in English, and the words ha'chashtranim b'nei haramochim are written in lashon hakodesh, and you're going to read ha'chashtranim b'nei haramochim to them in lashon hakodesh. That then we run into the problem that lechatchila we do not read the Megillah in two languages. The Mishnah Berurah said we should protest against the people who do this, alpha pishik suva balaz, even though when they do this kriya for the women, they might be using a Megillah that's Thak written in a foreign language. Do you like suva balaz? Because if the Megillah is not written in the language that you're using to read for the women, so if you want to read to the women in English and you're using a Hebrew Megillah, we know that that's not acceptable. Di like suva balaz, if the Megillah is not actually written in the foreign language that you're going to lane in, rak ma'ayin u'metargem balaz, and rather what you're doing is you're looking, let's say, into a Hebrew Megillah, and then you're reading to them a translation in English, havalei kara balpeh. That's a kriya balpeh, which we said already, you're not yaitza, ukidalael, ubalavachi lo yaitzi, and then certainly you wouldn't be yaitza. So when the Mechaber says that we have to protest, he's talking about a case that could technically work, which means the Megillah is actually written in the language that you're reading to the women with. Kasva achrayim, the achrayim write, da'afilu akayrim b'shnei yabim lahachmir. Even when you have a case where people are reading the Megillah on 2 days. Which 2 days? Yud Daled and Tesvav, because of astringency. What chumrah would make you read the Megillah on Yud Daled and Tesvav? Very simple. If you're in an ear, if you're in a city where you have a suffix, if it was mukaf mimais Yeshua ben Nun or not. You're in a city and it has a wall, or maybe it doesn't even have a wall now, but it had a wall once upon a time, and you don't know if it was walled at the time of Yeshua ben Nun. So you don't know if in this locale the proper day for Purim is Yodalit or Tesvav. So you're being machmir and you're laning both on Yodalit and Tesvav. So the Achrayim say, even in such a situation where you're going to lay Megillah both on Yodalit and Tesvav out of a chumrah, gam kein lo yikru balaz, you still should not employ any of these kulas that we've had over here to lay in the Megillah in a foreign language. Okay, so that completes Sif Yod Aleph, and with the completion of Sif Yod Aleph, we have now completed this complex topic of reading the Megillah in a foreign language. What have we seen to kind of encapsulate it? Yes, technically speaking, you could be Yotzei with a Kriya, with Mikra Megillah, in a foreign language. The most basic requirement that you need in order to be Yotzei with such a Kriya is the Megillah has to be written in that language. So again, you have an English speaker who wants to be Yotzei with Mikra Megillah in English. There has to be a Megillah that's written in English. If he himself lanes for himself out of an English Megillah and he understands English, then it could be his Yotzei. If somebody else is going to read for him, then it would seem that the Baal Koreh also has to understand English. Then we have Chumras. Then we have the opinions of different Paiskim. We have the more stringent Shita in Sif Yud that says that if you know Hebrew, then you cannot be soimach on this kula. If you know Hebrew, then you have to hear the Megillah in Hebrew. You cannot rely on the kula of hearing the Megillah in a laz. We also have the Shitas that say, even though we have this kula of hearing the Megillah in another language, but the characters, the letters that the Megillah are written in, have to be Hebrew characters written in Ksav Ashuris. That would mean that if you want to lay in Megillah, lay in English, it would have to be English transliterated into Hebrew, written in Hebrew characters, Ksav Ashuris, and then it would have to be read by a Baal Koreh who does not know Hebrew and understand Hebrew, and the Baal Koreh has to understand English, and the Shemaya has to not understand Hebrew and understand English. Finally, we had the Lavush, and the Lavush said, we're not saying on any of this. Our minig is, We write the Megillah in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, Ksav Ashuris. We read it in Hebrew, and we don't play any of these games. Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, Ksav Ashuris, is an automatic. Even if you don't understand a single word of the Megillah, the Baal Koreh, you have a kosher Megillah written in Hebrew, Ksav Ashuris. The Baal Koreh reads it properly. He has kavanah to be moitzi you. You listen, you hear every word. You have kavanah to be yotzei. You don't understand the word. It doesn't matter. You're yotzei anyway. Okay. Now we move on. Second line, Kufdun Hayam and Beis, Sif Yud Beis. Unfortunately, I think that this halacha is a little bit too negei l'maisa. Says the Mechaber, Kira'a misnamneim. Somebody reads the Megillah while he's half asleep. Okay? Says the Mechaber, Hayil v'loy nirdam b'shena, since he did not fall into a deep sleep, Yotza, he is Yotzei. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut Yud Lametes. Kira'a misnamneim. You read the Megillah while you were half asleep. Says I use the phraseology half asleep. What nisnamne means, the Gemara always translates the word nisnamne, nim v'loy nim, v'loy er. He's falling asleep, but he's not sleeping. He's up, but he's not fully awake. This is the fellow who's like, nodding off a shtickle, So, says the Mishnah Berurah, misnamne nikra, who's considered to be a misnamne? How do we measure if a person is misnamne? Very interesting. Kegaim de karule va'ani. If you call him, he will answer. So you see this person, and he's like half asleep, and you call him Rebbe Nachum. He said, yeah. So he answers you. But v'lo yada la'ahadure svara. But he can't speak clearly with you. Like you ask him a question that needs an intelligent answer, something that he has to think to respond, he can't respond clearly to you. But v'chi midkarule, but if you remind him, if you jog his memory of what you're speaking about, midka, then he'll taka remember. Now, Dirshu footnote number 34 brings down from Siman Taf Ayin Ches, Siman Taf Ayin Ches, where we were speaking about, oh wow, it just fell out of my head. Siman Taf Ayin Ches. Siman Taf Ayin Ches. Well, that's embarrassing. Hilchos Afikomen. So that's in Hilchos Pesach. And we're talking about eating the Afikomen. And we're talking about somebody who fell asleep in the middle of the Seder, fell asleep before the Afikomen. So over there, we also have to deal with this question of somebody who's misnamneim. So says the Dirshu footnote here in 34. Ula'el in Siman Taf Ayin Chesif Tez Bier, the Mishnah Berurah explains, Shemisnamneim Nikra, a misnamneim is called somebody, Kishaloi Nishtakea Bishina Kolkach, he didn't fall yet into a deep sleep. Ve'im Shayel Amaisai, and if you ask him, Heichon Hinachta Klize, you ask him, where did you put that keli? Maybe if it's the middle of the Seder, you asked him, where did we put the Kaishal Elio? Or where did we put, the embroidered cover for the Afikomen? Where did you put it? So we said that a misnamneim is somebody who, if you call him, he responds, but he can't be mahadure svara. He can't answer you intelligently. So over here, you called him, he responded. You asked him, Heichon hinachta klizeh, and he can't answer you. He's like, what do you want to know? But umaskirim loy, and then you trigger his memory. You remind him, and you say, Hinachtoi b'mokoi pliny? Did you put it over there in that cabinet? Nizkar, then he'll remember, va'omer, and he'll respond, Hey no lav, yes or no. So you know who the misnamnim is? The misnamnim is, you go, hey Menachem, yeah, what do you want? Where'd you put the car keys? Car keys? What? The car keys. Did you leave them in the closet? Did you leave them in the drawer by the front drawer? Yeah. I put them in when I came in the drawer. That's where they are. That's a misnamnem. So he's not in a deep sleep, but he is a little bit out of it. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, let's go back over here, so that's the misnamnem. He's going to korelei va'ani. If you call him, he responds. But he can't answer you in a lucid fashion. But if you trigger his memory, midkar, he'll remember and he'll respond. So, that's the person about whom, what did the Mishnah Berurah say here in Yud Beis? He said, if a person is laning the Megillah in that state, he's yoytze. So now, says the Mishnah Berurah over here, continuing in cut labetes, v'tzarich loymar, based on this mechaber, we have to say, it must be that he's at least awake enough that he could have kavana to be yoytze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. The mitzvah striches kavana, because it's the well-known shita of the mechaber, which is going to come into play yet later in today's shiur. The mechaber holds that mitzvah striches kavana. Mitzvah striches kavana means that you have to have kavana to be yoytze the mitzvah. We're not talking about the kavana to understand the meaning of the words that you're laying in the Megillah. That's not what we mean. What we mean here is you need to have kavana to be yoytze mikra Megillah. So what Mishnah Berurah is saying is like this. The mechaber says that somebody who's reading the Megillah while he's misnamnem, he could be yoytze. All right. And he describes, we know that misnamnem means that this guy's like half out of it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, since the mechaber holds mitzvah striches kavana, it must be that this fellow is awake enough that he's able to have kavana to be yoytze the mitzvah. And he brings this down from the pre-Megadim. Now, let's take a look at this Shar HaTzion, Ois Katan Lamed Tes, which I find to be a very interesting Shar HaTzion. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'lanias daiti zeu doichik. While the Chavetz Chaim does bring down the words of the Pri Megadim in the Mishnah Berurah, but here in the Shar HaTzion he says, V'lanias daiti zeu doichik. I don't agree so much with this Pri Megadim, that it must be that he's awake enough to have kavanah to be yoytze the mitzvah. Why? The Rashi Piresh al v'lo yoda lahadurei svara. This concept that the misnamnem is somebody who's out of it to the extent that he can't be mahadurei svara, he can't respond to you in a lucid way, that's taken from the lashon of the Gemara. And Rashi is mefarish what those words mean. And Rashi says, you know why this person can't be mahadurei svara? Mishum dehu ba mi binas halev. Because he's half asleep, and in order to be mahadurei svara, in order to answer something intelligently, you need binas halev. You need a certain level of awareness and intelligence. And this person is half out of it. He's half asleep. So he doesn't have binas halev. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'im kein eich nema da'oz yichavid b'machshavta lotzes. Again, if the bar of misnamnem is somebody who can't be mahadurei svara because he's lacking binas halev, which is what Rashi says, how could you say about such a person who's lacking binas halev that he has the ability and the clarity to be mechaved lotzes hamitzvah? This guy, you're telling me, can't be mahadurei svara because he's out of it. He doesn't have binas halev. If he doesn't have binas halev, don't tell me that he has in mind to be yoytze the mitzvah Mikra Megillah. So the Chavetz Chaim says, I don't get this Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says that when the Mechaber says that the misnamnem could be yoytze with his kriya, it must be that he has enough awareness that he can be mechaven to be yoytze the mitzvah Mikra Megillah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, that runs counter to Rashi's understanding of a misnamnem. Rashi's understanding of a misnamnem is that he doesn't have binas halev. If he doesn't have binas halev, don't tell me he's being mechaven to be yoytze Mikra Megillah. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, continuing in this Shar HaTzion as Kat Lamed Tes, v'efshar loymar b'pshitos, what you could say is, simply, the kivein lotzes ain't sarich b'chol teva. We already mentioned this earlier. When we say that mitzvah striches kavana, and therefore when somebody reads the Megillah or when somebody listens to the Megillah, he has to have kavana intent to be yoytze the mitzvah, that doesn't mean that you have to be OCD about it, and every word of the Megillah you have to be thinking, I have kavanah to be yotze, I have kavanah to be yotze, I have kavanah to be yotze. That's not what it means. Ela b'tchilas hakriya, only that at the beginning of Mikra Megillah, you have to have intent, but derech klal, in an overarching way, lotzeis b'kriyazu. At the beginning of Megillah, when you start reading the Megillah, or when you start listening to the Megillah, you have to have kavanah. Okay, what am I doing? I'm sitting down to lay in the Megillah, standing up to lay in the Megillah. I'm sitting down to hear the Megillah. Why? To be yotze the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. And that's it. Then you're done. And then you just listen to the Megillah. V'zeh poshut, and the Chofetz Chaim says it's obvious, the nimnum einay motzui koydem shehiska likroi. Generally speaking, the guy who's falling asleep is not falling asleep at the beginning of the Megillah. He's falling asleep in the middle of the Megillah. Ela basa shehiskil. So this fellow, he had in mind at the outset of his laning, or if he's the listener, he had in mind at the outset that he's laning in order to be yotze the mitzvah. It's later on, it's in the middle of the details of which day, when they fought in Shushan and who they killed, and the numbers of how many people they killed. It's somewhere in the middle of there, after all the excitement, after they hung Haman. It's in the middle of there that the guy's falling asleep. Vim Kain, Asi Shaper, and that would be a good shot in the Mechaber without coming on to this Prima Godim that the Chofetz Chaim says is a doich. Okay, so let's just go back here. So that was Ois Cotton Lamid Tes. Okay. Now we go on to Ois Cotton Mem. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said that the one who's reading the Megillah misnamneim, since he's not in a deep sleep, he could be yotze. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem. V'hu hadin hashemeya mimenu. So that's as far as the koirei. The koirei, who is misnamneim, he could be yotze with his kriya. How about the person who's hearing the Megillah from this Bal Koirei, who is misnamneim? Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'hu adin hashemei mimenu. So too the one who's listening to the Megillah from the misnamneim, Gabke yotze. He's also yotze. Imrak nishma im advarim heitev. As long as the Bal Koirei is enunciating the words clearly. If he's slurring his words and he's not saying the words properly, it's a different story. But if he's enunciating everything clearly, so then the Shemeya, who's hearing every word, could be yotze. Kei kasav ha'me'iri. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, and this plays into this Chofetz Chaim, this plays into the Sha'ar Tzion we just read. Va'af agav detzarich lechaven lahoitzi. Even though the Bal Koirei has to have kavanah to be moitzi the Shemeya, and we're dealing over here with a Bal Koirei who's misnamneim, so how could the Shemeya be yotze? Either Bal Koirei has to have kavanah to be moitzi him, and the Bal Koirei is half in the bag, he's half out of it. So, but says Chofetz Chaim, not a problem. Either you could say that the mistamnem still has kavanah to be moitzi, but it seems more likely to say, loymar, again, we're talking about where the Bal Koirei had in mind at the beginning of the Kriya, before he started to fall asleep. Again, the same way the Sha'ar Tzion just said. That when you listen to the Megillah, you don't have to have kavanah every minute. I'm listening to be yotze, I'm listening to be yotze, I'm listening to be yotze. The Bal Koirei does not have to have kavanah every minute. I'm having kavanah to be moitzi people. I'm having kavanah to be moitzi people. No. When he starts out at the beginning of the Kriya, he has to have in mind, I'm being moitzi everybody with the brachas, and I'm being moitzi them with the Kriya. After that, he just lanes. And that is okay. He could do that even if he's misnamneim. Now we go back to the Mechaber, 3 lines down the middle of the line, by the Ois Cotton Mem Aleph for the Mishnah Berurah. Aval im shema'a misnamneim. So till now we were talking about somebody who read the Megillah while he was half asleep. But now, how about somebody who listened to the Megillah while he was half asleep? That sounds a little bit familiar, maybe? You're sitting and you're listening to the Megillah, and you got a slow Bal Koirei. And again, when you're getting into the details over there at the end of the Megillah, maybe you start to fall asleep a little bit. Says the Mechaber, Aval im shema'a misnamneim. If you're listening to the Megillah while you're half asleep, lo yotze, you got a problem, you're not yotze. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem Aleph. Avalim Shema'a mistamneim. If you heard the Megillah while you're half asleep, that's different. Explains the Mishnah Berurah what the difference is. The Bekriya, when it comes to laning the Megillah, Kevan Shekorei Karoi, since the facts stand for themselves, the Baal Koreh might be half asleep, but he's reading the Megillah out loud, and he's saying all of the words. Hare Muchach, it's clear, Sharami Anafshe Loimer Shapir. He's aware enough that he's able to make sure that he's reading every word and he's saying it clearly. So even though you see he's fading, but Lamaisa, he's saying every word and he's saying it clearly. Masha'en came b'shmiya, contrast that to a listener. If a listener is falling asleep, he's not laning anything. He's not standing by the bima and reading. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting. Somebody who's sitting, listening to the Megillah, and you see he's nodding off, bevadai chosel like kamatevos. It's a vadai. You're mistamneim and you're listening. Clearly, you must have missed at least a couple of words. And remember what we said. Certainly, lechatchila, you miss even one word in the Megillah, you're not yotzei. Now, there's a very nice Dirshu footnote here. Footnote number 35, which I find this to be a very fascinating footnote. I think this is a question that comes up. It says like this. Somebody who listens to Mikra Megillah, and in the middle of the Megillah, his mind turns to other things. He's Mesiach Das. You're listening to the Megillah, and in the middle of the Megillah, you start thinking about your Shalach Manos list. Or you start thinking about that day's work. Or you start worrying that maybe the items that you put into the Shalach Manos don't reflect the theme of your Shalach Manos strongly enough, and maybe the string licorice that you used should really be a different color. Okay, I got in my pet peeve. So, if you're listening to the Megillah, and in the middle of the Megillah, your mind started wandering, you're being Mesiach Das, you're thinking about other things. Is that a problem? Maybe now you have to say, I don't know if I was Yotzei Mikra Megillah. Middle of the Megillah, I push it, I spaced out. I was thinking about something else. Das Hagoyin Rabbi Yosef Shalom al Yashiv. It's the opinion of Rabbi Yashiv Zechet Tzadik Levracha. She'em roya sheyodoi oichezes adayin b'mokem anochin. If you see that your finger is still on the place, you're still following, and you're in the right place. You snap back into it, and you see that the chazan is laning and your finger is on Asher Yishlatu HaYehudim. So you're still following along with the Baal Koreh. Says the Goyen Rebel Yashiv, if you see that, you're following along and you see that your finger is still in the right place. Or let's say you're not following your finger, but you see that you know where they're holding. That's called that your kavana is still on the kriya, the yatsa yedei and your yotzei. So says one of the Poiskei Adar, says that's considered, but I was spaced out. Rabbi Yasha says that means that you had enough kavana. It's true that part of your mind is on something else, but clearly part of your mind is still on Mikra Megillah because you have your finger on the place. You know where they're holding. Even if you space out, if you have the Megillah or the Chumash in front of you, and it's clear that you're still following along with the Koreh, Yatsa, you are Yotzei. I love that because that's the kind of question that comes up that people worry about. And I think that's why somebody like Rabbi Yashiv Zatzal, who was a Pesach Adar, he had the needs of the Dar on his mind. He understood that this is a common question, and he understood Leinit the Torah Lamalachei Shares, and he understood that there are Bali Kriya to take a long time to lay the Megillah, and he understood that you hear the Megillah at night, you're exhausted, and yeah, you have a lot of things on your mind. Certainly you should try to make sure that this doesn't happen to you, but if it does, you're Yotzei. Okay. So that was Sif Yud Beis. Now let's go on to Sif Yud Gimel. Another interesting case. Haya Koisva. You're a cipher and you're writing the Megillah. No, how do you write the Megillah? Shekoirei pasuk ba Megillah shehu matik mimena. You're reading the psukim of the Megillah out of a Megillah that you're copying out of. So you have a Megillah over here, and you go Vayihi b'me'ach hashverish, and you say it. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. No, you take the quill. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? Who Achashverosh? Ha-melech me'hodav kush. Ha-melech me'hodav kush. Now, the way I just did it, I said it both times. I don't know if that's right. So let's change that story a little bit. You looked in the Megillah, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. And then you wrote without saying, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. Then you look back in the Megillah, Hu Achashverosh, and you wrote, Hu Achashverosh. But you keep reading every word of the Megillah out of the kosher Megillah that you're copying out of. That's the case here. You're writing a Megillah. How? You read a pasuk from the kosher Megillah that you're copying out of, and then you write it in the new Megillah. So it turns out that you're saying every word of the Megillah out of a kosher Megillah. Says the Mechaber, Im kivein liba yotzeis yidei chayvasai. If you had kavanah to be yotze in the midst of Mikra Megillah, yotze, you're yotze. The who, with the caveat, with the requirement, as long as the Megillah that you're copying out of is a complete Megillah written in the right way. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem Beis. Even if you learned the entire Megillah this way, you read from a kosher Megillah that you're copying out of one pasuk at a time, and you wrote it in the new Megillah. You read the whole Megillah that week. Sheira, it's a kosher mikra Megillah. Hayel shekiv and laseis bazei yidei chavasei, because you had kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah. Ve'em loy kiv and laseis afilu rak pasuk rishon. If you didn't have kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah, even if your lack of kavanah was only on the first pasuk of the Megillah, av shemisham ve'elech is kavan laseis, even though from then and on you had kavanah to be yotze, lo yotze, you're not yotze because you need kavanah. The Mechaber says you have to have kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah. Sasam bazeh. The Mechaber is clearly deciding over here with this halacha, like the poskim disfiralu who hold that mitzvah strichas kavanah latzes yidei mitzvah. What does the Mechaber say? He says whether or not you yotze in this case is dependent on whether you or not you had kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah. So clearly the Mechaber is paskening that in order to be yotze a mitzvah, even a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, you have to have kavanah to be yotze. He sends us back to Hilchos Kriyashma, Siman Samach Sif Dalid, where this is a lengthy Mishnah Berurah, lengthy biur halacha, and a discussion about this point. But clearly over here, the Mechaber is showing you his psak that mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. The Mechaber said in order for this to work, shetei ksuva kula, you have to have an entire Megillah written properly in front of you, Ayla El B'Sif Gimel, where we said that b'di'eved, even if the Megillah that you're learning from is missing some psukim, even if it's missing a lot of psukim, as long as it's roiv, and it has the beginning and the end, and it's not missing in Yanacher, you could be yotze. Let's go weiter over here in the Mechaber. 4 lines from the bottom, by the Ois Cotton Mem Hey for the Mishnah Berurah. V'chein im haya magia, or if you're not writing a new Megillah, you have an existing Megillah, and you're correcting it. V'chein im haya darsha, or you're giving a drasha on the Megillah. Shekairei pasuk b'Megillah shleim of a darshay. So you have a complete kosher Megillah in front of you, and you're giving a shiur. Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh, hamelech b'hodav kush, sheva v'esru mumei medina. Why does it say hu Achashverosh? Well, we could say it like this, we could say it like that. And you give a 4-hour shiur, and you go through the whole Megillah, you read one pasuk at a time, and you keep interspersing your laning with your drasha. Says the Mechaber, Im kiven liba latzis yidei chavasai, if you had kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah mikra Megillah, yotze, you're yotze. But, says the Mechaber, v'lo yafsik ba b'inyanim acherim kishedarsha. But you can't go off on a tangent while you're giving your drasha on Megillah and start talking about Hilchos Shabbos and start talking about Boirer. Because now already you're going off on a tangent, that's a hefsek. But as long as you're talking about Megillah, guess what? It's not a hefsek. So that would be okay. You cannot be mafsik with inyanim acherim. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton mem hey. This works not only if you're writing a new Megillah, even if you're correcting an existing one. What the Mechaber wants to say is, while you're correcting the Megillah, you're reading every pasuk, and you have kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah mikra Megillah. But you have to read the words with the proper vowelization. In other words, I'll give you an example from the Torah Kedosha. Toitafos by Tefillin. It's written Tes Vav Tes Fei Saf. It's written Chosar without the second Vav. Somebody who's reading it lahagia might read it not toitafos but toitefes, because he just wants to make sure that he doesn't make a mistake and think there's an extra vav there that's not supposed to be written. So if you want to be yoitza when you're being magia Megillah, you have to read it with the proper vowelization. Avalim kara lahagia al piyam asaris v'loy menikad karoy ani yoitzi nechevasik. It's got mevarsha also lahafsik. You can't be mafsik in the Megillah with inyanim acherim. Ayin la'el b'sif hei b'haga memzayim b'inyanim acherim hainu shaloi b'inyanai shalyayim. You cannot go be mafsik with things that have nothing to do with the Megillah. I wanted to read Sharetzion Cut Mem Gimel, but we're out of time. I'll just paraphrase what the Sharetzion says. Basically, he says the reason why you could get away with this, the reason why you could say a 4-hour shiur on the Megillah, read every pasuk from a Kasha Megillah, and intersperse the psukim with your drasha, and it's not considered a hefsek, is because what's the point of Mikra Megillah? The point of Mikra Megillah is Persume Nisa. Giving a shiur on the Megillah is even a bigger Persume Nisa, and that's why it's okay. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for the mitzvah of limud HaTorah. In the discussion of limud HaTorah, the Rebbe Hashem should be making on everyone. The Rebbe Hashem should send Yeshua's refuahs parnaset sheduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the BS Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.